Welcome back, everyone. This is Adam, your moderator, rejoining you, and thank you so much for joining us for today's Smithsonian Online Education Conference. We are about to dive into our third and final session of the day in the Teaching the 57th U.S. Presidential Inauguration Q&A with Smithsonian experts. And we are joined by Shannon Perich, who's going to be talking to us about photography inside and out. So thank you so much for joining us today, Shannon.
Thank you, Adam. Thank you, Stevie. Thank you, Ashley. Hello, everyone out there. I'm so glad to join you today. As you know, the inauguration is coming up in just less than a little over a week from now. And as I walked across the mall, I could see that DC is gearing up for it. We know we'll be in full gear when the porta potties arrive on the mall, but they're not here yet. So what we're going to do today is we're going to gear up for photography and thinking about the inauguration. So what are we going to do? We're going to talk about how photography shapes the way we understand the presidential inauguration. We're going to think about how technology and culture shape the making of the photographs, which then is going to shape how we understand the image. And we're going to get there by looking at and talking about historical contemporary photographs. I promise it won't be this didactic all the way through. This is just setting the stage. So let's jump right in. So we're talking about photography, and here what have I done? I've given you a print. Why have I done that? Well, the first president that was alive when photography was around was William Henry Harrison. However, the photography wasn't capable of photographing the event yet. So I want to show you, wanted to give us a landing place. So photography is invented over the course of the 1830s and then presented to the public in several formats in 1839. And it wasn't until really 1842, the year after William Henry Harrison's inaugural event, that photography is really in a place where the materials are good enough to be taken outside of the studio. We're jumping ahead many years, and here are the photographers at President Taft's inauguration in 1909. Now, the reason I'm starting with the photographers is because I want to think about the makers of all of these images that we're getting ready to see. There's always somebody behind the product and the image, and we want to have some sensitivity to where they're coming from and what their intentions are. If you look at this bank of photographers, there really aren't that many there. We could count them. There's maybe a dozen. Not everybody who's in this photograph are photographers. If you look on the right, down towards the bottom, we can see a woman. That may be Frances Benjamin Johnston. I haven't been able to identify her yet, but she was a local photographer here doing a lot with the presidency and news images at the time. And these are the banks of photographers in 2009. There were actually two banks of photographers. There were the folks on the right who were in the stadium, and then there was a tower that was built in the center, and there were about a dozen and a half photographers who were there. Once they got onto the platform, they had to be there all day long.
Wow, so just a few more people.
Yeah, yeah, just a few more people. And so my point about showing you these two is to think about what the technology offers. Every technology has opportunities and limitations. So in 1909, those cameras were producing glass plate negatives. And then in 2009, think about all the different kinds of photographs that were made and the kinds of equipment that was used. There was digital photography, there was film photography, television, live web streaming across the computers, cell phones, there was a daguerreotypist, there were surveillance cameras, there was aerial photography. Did I really say daguerreotypist? In 2009, that very first commercially successful process that was incredibly cumbersome? Yes. And why is that? Well, Jerry Spinoli, who's pictured there at the top, hiding beneath his large format camera, you can see the lens cap is on, happens to also be a daguerreotypist. And he got special permission to bring his equipment onto the grounds and photograph the inauguration. So what you're seeing here are two photographs. One is a daguerreotype and one is a contemporary color photograph. What's the difference between them? What do they look like?
Great, and so feel free to type your responses into the chat box on the left. I see an early answer of one has no color.
Well, actually, if you look on the left, it does have color. And it is blue. And the reason it's blue is because that part of the photograph, the sky, is overexposed. So actually, the silver in the plate is, the silver halides are too bright. So daguerreotype is a copper plate that has a silver surface, and that silver is made light sensitive by buffing it to a super high shine, and then you activate it by adding bromine and iodine. And you develop it, you expose it directly in the camera, and then you take it out of the camera and develop it in fumes of mercury. It is not a safe process necessarily, not one that I recommend students try, but it's an exceptional process in its own right. So what we're looking at on the left is a metal photograph, and the one on the right is made up of pixels and electronic signals. The one on the left is mostly monochromatic. The one on the right does show color. We see a number of folks who are telling us and indicating that one is reversed. That's absolutely correct. When an image comes into a lens, it's upside down and backwards. It's not until a little bit into photography that we're able to put a reversing lens in so that we see things correctly, or that we're able to use a negative and flip the negative. Also, if you look at the way that the colors are recorded, it's hard to differentiate between blue and red, in some cases in the flags. So again, the reason I want to bring this up is to bring up your awareness about the technology that we're using and how we're used to seeing things and how the camera is moderating in some way our experience. Oops, trying to forward here. There we go. So who's taking photographs in 2009? There are a lot of different kinds of people. There are the photojournalists, there are commercial and professional photographers, there are the agency photographers who belong to the White House, the Smithsonian, Congress, the Park Service, all sorts of government agencies have folks who are down here who are photographing, and of course the participants themselves. So we're going to look at the kinds of photographs that each of these groups make as we work towards our final activity at the end. Let me ask you first, what is a photojournalist? What do you think that they do that's different than other photographers? How do you know a photojournalistic photograph when you see it? We had a question a little bit earlier about photographs and portraits of George Washington. The images that we see of George Washington were not photographic. He was way too early for that. As Brianna in our earlier session had mentioned, life masks were often used, and the artists were able to create fairly accurate renderings of previous celebrities and individuals who were able to afford having life masks made. So these are some great answers that we're seeing: a story that's supported by photographs, a story with pictures, capturing a story. And here's the really important one is report the news around it. One of the things that really distinguishes photojournalists is that there is an intention that the photograph is going to be published. There's documentary photography and there are photojournalists. And I think of photojournalists as a subset of documentary photographers. So the photojournalists tend to work knowing that the images are intended for publication. Today that of course means printed or electronic distribution. Often they're looking for the photograph that will encapsulate some aspect of the event, hoping of course that it will appear on the front page, above the fold, or on the cover of a magazine. But they know that that photograph needs to be timely and it needs to resonate with a lot of people, and they're making photographs that will tell a story. But photojournalists also want to make series of images that are going to convey the whole nature of an event. Documentary photographers, of course, want to tell visual stories as well, but the distribution may not be so immediate and the breadth of the audience may not be quite as broad either. So Life magazine is one of the very early and important magazines that helped shape the way that we understand the photo essay and the importance of news photography and in journalism. These photographs, let me just say that all of the Life magazines have been scanned and are available in Google Books. And so these are all screenshots from pages from Google Books, just so you know. So here we have in January 31, 1949, a photo essay. And let's just look through these for a moment and to get a sense of what photojournalistic images look like. These are also a subset of a larger story. So here we see crowds. We see Truman behind the eagle. Here we see an interesting makeup of the crowd, and we see some of the parade. Most of my images, I want to tell you, I focused on the swearing-in ceremony so that we didn't get too far afield in the way that we are comparing images. So when we think about those Life photographs, let me just go back one for just a second.
And as we were looking at those images, actually a couple of questions popped
super.
up. Why do they all dress uniformly? Was one question from Kelly in North Carolina.
Who was they?
I think the audiences in a lot of the pictures that we're looking at.
I'm not a fashion historian, so I can't tell you exactly. But if you do look at this crowd at the top, if you see that they're still wearing top hats here as late as the 1940s. So there is a kind of pomp and circumstance and a formality to the inauguration. And so you see the upper echelon who are, oh, here we go. They are the photojournalists. But you see the upper echelon still here identifying themselves by dressing in a particular kind of way. Mm-hmm. They, the photojournalists, let's see if we can find oh, here? Well, these are not inauguration photographers. They often wear their vests because they have a lot of gear. They have lots of pockets to carry the gadgets that they need, the various lenses. You don't want to lose your lens caps. You've got film you need to tuck away. So they are all just happen to wear the vest and...
I see. So less fashion, more
yes.
Technical.
Yes. Utility. It's all about utility. One of the nice things about looking at these magazines online and to see the whole magazine is that you can see what comes before and after these articles, which helps provide a larger context to understanding the value of the inaugural event. In this particular magazine, it's interesting to note that the page right before this article starts is an advertisement for the second volume of Winston Churchill's Memories, and then the article immediately following it is about the collapse of a general's power in China. Now, when we got to 2009, the photography was very different, as we've mentioned before, with all of the digital photography that was available. And here, you could, if you look in the lower right-hand corner of this, you could add your own photograph to the official inaugural book project. So we're able to put ourselves into the inauguration, whether you were here in DC or somewhere else. And so with this digital technology, we're able to combine lots of images. And this prompted us to think about what that means. And we did an exhibition around this idea in 2009. Let's look at some of these. Let's get back to photojournalism and look at some of these photojournalistic images. These are a set of photographs that were used for that exhibition that come out of the inaugural project, and all of these photographers are photojournalists. And I just want to remind you of the breadth of the inaugural event, that it's not just the swearing-in ceremony, that there are parades, there's the prayer service, there are lots of other events that surround that happen in front of the cameras and away from the cameras. This is one of these scenes that happens away from the public's eye. If you look in the window in the very front foreground, you'll see some of the photographers reflected in the shiny, clean car. This is a photograph by David Hume Kennerly, a very well-known and prize-winning photojournalist. Just a few people were invited to this event. This is the moment of the transition of power when the outgoing president and the incoming president are at the White House together, and they're leaving in order to go up to the Capitol. This is a photograph by Pete Souza. Pete Souza is going to become, after this photograph is made, he's going to become the White House photographer, so you've actually probably seen a lot of his work. He was a photojournalist at the Chicago Tribune before coming to DC. And if you note, there's the Smithsonian Castle on the far left. This is an interesting image to think about the relationship to photojournalism to other kinds of photography. When we think about transitions, poetically, artistically, we often think about them in terms of windows, doors, passing through gates. And this kind of image references the poetic. So we have this dark foreground, and Obama is walking into the light. So in the way that Brianna talked about some of the paintings that reflect mood and reflect optimism, this is one that might be interpreted in that way. And you can see the bank of photographers that are directly in front of the podium. Here's a terrific photograph by Paul Morris. It really lets us into a behind the scenes. This is something that we can't see as private citizens. So photojournalists, again, what can they do that we can't do? They have access. So they've built up credibility to be able to reveal what we can't see. So it's terrific to be able to see the tape marks. On the tape are everybody's names. We can see that Sasha is on her stool so that she's tall enough so that she can be seen over the barrier up front. So this is made by Karen Ballard from the stand from that tower. She's able to get in very close. And then the parade. So we have a kind of an idea, hopefully, about what the photojournalists do. Let's think about all the other photographers out there in the world who get paid to make images. This happens to be the Smithsonian photographers, the ones who were at the National Museum of American History. This was their holiday card they sent out to us. And professional photographers have a skill set that's different than photojournalists in some ways. These photographers have to be able to work in multiple environments to photograph the minuscule. I asked Hugh Tallman, who's in the bearded one in the back, to photograph an image that was 1/8 of an inch in diameter. So they have to be able to photograph that tiny to entire trains, to the National Mall exhibitions, events. So they have to multitask in a different kind of way. And they make images for different purposes.
It really helps to set aside the smartphone photography that takes place these days. There's a real expertise needed for that huge spectrum.
There is a need for photographers who have access to the right equipment to make the images that you need rather than the limitations of your one cell phone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Let's just scoot through a few images. I want you to just look at the colors, the quality of the images, the textures, and the scenes, and let's compare them. Let's think about what's the same in this set of photographs and what's different. So what we're going to look at are different photographs from different inaugurations. There are about 5 of them. So here we have Woodrow Wilson. The previous one was Lincoln's first inauguration, as you saw. Here's Harding's inauguration. This image was created as a souvenir. As you can see, it's a panorama. It's a circuit camera, and the lens actually rotated around in order to be able to capture the photograph, the whole of the scene. You've probably been in some panoramas in which somebody's been able to run from one end and around the camera to the other side and be in both ends of the photograph at the same time. So here's another use of that idea of the professional photographer is the commercial photograph, the souvenir photograph. And here we have FDR's inauguration, not at the Capitol, but rather at the White House in 1945. And we can think about why that would be. Kelly says from North Carolina that the more ornate as time progresses and sharper images, definitely sharper images. Ornate may be arguable. If you look at some of the early daguerreotypes, they're pretty fancy when they're cased up, but definitely sharper. And we're able to increase the film speed, and we're able to take more action shots. Here's Eisenhower in 53. What kinds of things have you noticed that are the same? These roles absolutely, as Ashley says, showcase the president as the commander-in-chief. And you can see that with the seal over and over again. And why do we continue to use the seal over and over again? It becomes a symbol to the nation and to other countries. And here's Nixon. Now this is the first one that you've seen besides Obama that's been in color. What does color do when you see the image in color? Does it bring more power? Does it make it less interesting? Does it make it more interesting, or is it just different?
On the question of common themes between the images, I see people pointing out that Juan says people are gathered around the president. So you have that same gathering in all of the images. That there are galleries of VIPs right behind the president as well.
Mm-hmm. Right, and symbolism is important. It's the symbolism that we see we use. There was a question about propaganda earlier. Where's the line between propaganda and information and reinforcing cultural values? We believe that the inauguration is important as part of the democratic process, that we're able to have transition of power that are peaceful, and it becomes important for us to show the nation and the world that we, as Americans, can do that. And so by doing this and repeating it year after year, or every 4 years after every 4 years, as it were, and using those same symbols, we build that power. So I mentioned that we did an exhibition in 2009, and this is a group of photographs that were taken by the Smithsonian photographers. I mentioned earlier, it's important to know who the photographers are sometimes to help gain perspective on what their intentions are. So when I tell you that all of these photographs are by Smithsonian photographers, actually I think it's the other way around. This is one. This needs to go to the second. So we'll just flip on the other one. We'll see those in just a moment.
Great, and so we'll pull up that next slideshow in just a second here.
I think, is that right? Yes, so these are the Smithsonian photographers. So you can see that they were out early. They were there before things started. This is on the floor of the National Museum of American History. People are starting to gather outside the castle. See the porta potties in the background? So part of what Smithsonian photographers are tasked with doing is showing the relationship between the inauguration and our role here on the mall. And these are folks inside the museum watching the inauguration. So go ahead.
One question that's come in, I think building off of our previous comments about the groups gathered at every inauguration, is there a requirement that oath-taking be witnessed by a certain number of people? Is that what it relates to?
I don't know the answer to that question. I would assume that the oath-taking would be witnessed by a certain number of people, but I bet it specifies who those people are. But it's part of the privilege of the democratic process that anybody can come and witness this very important event. And it's part of our impulse as citizens to come and see our government in action. So let's look at a third set of photographs and makers of photographs around the inauguration. So this would be another set of groups that we represented in this exhibition, I do solemnly swear, photographs of the 2009 inauguration. And we did this because we realized that in 2009 something had happened. And that is that there was a switch in the balance of how many images were produced by amateurs. And not just how many were produced by amateurs, but in the mass distribution of the images. So images that were sent across the internet, cell phones, updates on Facebook, all of the kinds of places where we could distribute the images, that outnumbered and outpowered what photojournalists were doing. And we began to think about, we didn't have an answer in 2009, I'm not sure that we have an answer today, about what that really means. So this exhibition was simply to highlight the differences among different groups of photographers. And there's value in every single group taking these photographs. And in some ways, it's everybody together who create a better, broader understanding of an event because we have multiple perspectives. So if we look at who the participants are, let's look at who the participants are in the inauguration of Roosevelt. This is the first Roosevelt, Teddy Roosevelt, in 1905. Can we enlarge this photograph?
Yeah, and if you click the full screen button in the top right-hand corner of your screen, you can make that larger in your view right now.
Okay.
Just make sure to click full screen again when you want to return to the chat room.
So if you look at this photograph, who do you see is there? The first thing that you might notice about this photograph is that it is not like any of the others that we've seen. This is a stereo photograph or a stereo view, stereograph. If you put it in a stereoscope, you would be able to see it in 3D. I think this photographer must have had a little bit of a sense of humor because the image that would have been closest to you is the horses behind here. And what you would have seen right behind the horse is a man who has a badge, and that's a police officer. Exactly, Linda, Pam, you're right. It's mostly white guys in bowler hats. But in fact, there is a little girl to the right, and there are some women. There's a woman in the front row up to the left, and they're scattered in. There are actually several African Americans as well. If you look along the right edge of the photograph up towards the top, there are some men in uniform on horses. I'm not sure what kind of crowd control they had, but there is a little bit of diversity here. Not much, but there is some. And then let's look at another two images, a compare and contrast again. Here's crowds in 1945 and crowds in 2009. So again, if you'll be reminded that the image on the left is from the White House, so we're looking down to the ellipse from the back of the White House. In the foreground, those guys, if you look at their hats, they have little white tags. You might recognize them as press photographers and journalists. In the middle ground, there's a row of guys with their hands behind their backs. Those are the policemen. Not so much of a crowd for 1945, but then look at 2009. Vast, vast numbers. Think about how many people are there and how many people have telephones on them, or have cell phones on them, or have cameras. I don't know what the math is on every one of those people taking how many photographs. It boggles my mind.
And I like the comment that the photo on the right seems like it was taken from an airplane, that you have this huge sprawling audience.
It is. This is a Paul Morris photograph, and he's the one who took the photograph from of the first family standing there on the tape. So you know where he's right from the Capitol, and that's all the way down.
Wow.
So let me ask this question, and what do you think that participants bring to the dialogue that photojournalists and professional photographers don't? What do we learn from their photographs? And then let's look at that other slideshow while we're thinking about that. Mm-hmm. So the second slideshow that we're going to see, both of these they're short because they were put into the exhibition in 2009, so I just pulled them out of that. These are all photographs that were made by amateurs. The folks who organized the official Obama inaugural book wanted to include the work of participants and amateur photographers into the book. So they worked with a company called photobucket.com, and individuals who wanted to participate could upload their images into a specific site on that photo distribution website, and they got incorporated into the official point of view, or the official book rather. So Megan Smith inserts, in talking about what the common or ordinary point of view is, that something is personal, something that's interesting. I like the idea that it democratizes the American historical experience, because in fact there are many historians who feel that the experience is what happens at the ordinary level, not just what happens at the decision-making level or the military level. It's the everyday life that we live that is the American experience. And in fact, it's both. It's dynamic, the world that we live in, and hopefully these photographs in combination express that. You also saw that in this group there was protest, that protest is part of who we are, and that even at this event, that it's okay to express your dissenting opinions. Okay.
I like what Ashley pointed out there too, that we have images of people from around the country. It's not just those gathered in DC anymore.
That's right. That's a great point. Thank you for being observant, Ashley. One of the interesting things about that photo bucket project was that people did take photographs of viewing parties and the TV and how they celebrated away from Washington, D.C. All right, we're going to switch gears now, and we've set the stage for the last third of the presentation. So we've talked about different kinds of photographers. We've talked a little bit about technology. We've talked a little bit about the users and the makers and the functions of photography. So let's do some analysis. So this is a photograph of Lincoln's second inaugural address on March 4th, 1865. And we'll just go in just to prove to you that it's Lincoln. There he is. And let me show you the back of this. We're going to go back to the whole image in just a second so you can see it. If you note here, it says that Clarence Dodge is the photographer, but in fact Clarence Dodge is not the photographer. The photographer was Alexander Gardner. We know that Alexander Gardner took 3 photographs, and he was the only photographer there. And he did not think that he owned those photographs because the inauguration was about an American process. So he didn't mind that other people were copying the photographs and distributing them as their own. So what you're actually seeing is a Gardner photograph by Dodge as rephotographed. So when you rephotograph a photograph, you begin to lose a little bit of detail. But that said, there's still a lot of information here. If you're wondering, I'll just go back for a second. If you're wondering what that oval stain is, it is from another photograph that's been turned on its side. There was a portrait that was lying behind it for some time before my tenure, not my fault. This is why we have interleaving tissue to keep this sort of thing from happening. But these there were 2 photographs who lived together for a long time, and there was a historic record of that.
It touches on the trickiness of maintaining these images over such a long time, too.
Yes.
I can't imagine with how far back some of these go.
Careful handling, clean handling, actually a minimum of handling, and good storage are really important. So what makes this photograph interesting is that this is the moment in which Lincoln is reading his very short inauguration address. It was only like 4 paragraphs long. It was a very short address. So we're lucky that we have this particular moment. You can see that the focus of the camera is very much in the center, that around the edges the folks are out of focus. But what makes it really interesting is that we can compare it to another photograph. In 1956, this photograph and article appeared in Life magazine, in which Frederick Meserve, who was an avid and still is, the family still is, avid Civil War photography collectors, discovered that at the inauguration were John Wilkes Booth and the other conspirators. Now, Booth had said that he had missed his chance at the inauguration. So Meserve went back and looked closely to see if he could identify where everybody was. Now, this is really hard to read here, so I don't know if you can point out right at the top center, you can see a 1 to the, can you see it there? Go right here.
You can just click on the screen and it will appear.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't realize I could do that. So right here is 1, that's where John Wilkes Booth was.
Aha.
Right here is John Ford, who owned Ford's Theater. And here is Abraham Lincoln's bodyguard. Mary Todd Lincoln is over here. And this is a different kind of arrangement, as you can see, from how we have everybody organized today. And here at the bottom is Lewis Payne. And Lewis Payne used to go around town wearing this Union uniform as a way to disguise his political affiliations. So if we take that photograph and we look at ours, which is a variant on the one that was published, we see several things. One is we can see Lincoln in focus. The one that appeared in Life magazine, for some reason that particular photograph that Meserve had, Lincoln was obscured. Here we can see him clearly. However, Mary Lincoln is in this very, very faint space right here, actually. There's a tiny little face you might be able to see. That's her. Again, here is his bodyguard, which is way far away. John Ford is here. And we can't see in this particular one exactly where John Wilkes Booth is. But we can still see Payne here at the bottom. So they really did have quite an opportunity to put their plans into place and chose not to do it here in this particular public and crowded space.
And hold on one second, we'll pull that right back up. But why do you think that was? Was the main decision, did they want to escape and survive, or what were their thoughts?
I'm sure that that was part of it, that they couldn't quite get the logistics in place to be able to carry it out. There were certainly so many people who would have pounced on them that they wouldn't have been able to get away with it. Linda Rosenblum in Topeka makes the point that amateur photographs have low resolution that are only good for screen images and not prints. Again, that's a really important point to make, is that amateur photographs, while they express an experience, may not always have the quality that may be sustaining or over the course of time, or may be able to distribute easily. So what do you think this kind of comparison offers us? What do we learn from this? One of the interesting things about this photograph is this man here with his hat over his face. That would be the Vice President, Andrew Johnson. Apparently he had been drinking before the inauguration and kept his hat up over his face the whole time.
I feel like they can't really get away with that these days.
No. No. So what do we learn from this comparison? We understand that security was not the same. We understand that this is actually a very modest inaugural ceremony. If you look at it in comparison to the others, there's no pomp and circumstance. Actually, you don't see too many men in formal wear. You do see some in their top hats, but not too many. You can see that there is this rough-hewn stage, front of the stage. It's not even finished. The presidential seal is not here. All they've done is bring this table, and he's got the Bible that he swore on right here. It's a very different mood here, as they're still a part of the Civil War and coming out of so much trauma and drama. And of course, it's only within about 5.5 weeks that President Lincoln will be assassinated. Now let's jump to the 2009 inauguration and look at the photograph. We're going to come back to that to Gardner's photograph in just a moment, but let's explore this one for just a moment.
Great, and so what we're bringing up on your screen is actually a screen share of the photographer's website, where you can go on your own as well and take a look at this photo with zoom capabilities.
So we can go in with enormous detail. Look, there's Jerry Spinelli right there, our daguerreotype photographer. And we can keep going in and going in and going in. We can all but read these labels, their IDs, and who had access. But look how many people have cameras sitting here in the front row. Were any of you who are out there, were you here for the 2009 inauguration? I like this part over here. Let's go over here. I think this is funny. We have a photo. We have a photo being staged right here in front of us, right during the speech, during the inaugural address. And we can continue to go in, and we can see everybody who's here.
I see Elizabeth said in chat that she was not there in 2009, but she'll be there. She wasn't. Sorry, yeah, but she'll be there this year.
Fantastic.
Excellent.
We welcome you. And then we can look at all the different photographers that are here.
The question that's actually come in comparing 2009 and 2013, do you think that we'll see many changes between the two?
I think that we will see fewer people. I think this is a less historic moment. I think there will still be a lot of people. I don't think that there will be as many, I don't think the enthusiasm is going to be as high as it was, but there's always a lot of excitement and a lot of celebration around it. Let's see. Oops. Okay. So if we do a compare and contrast activity here for our last 5 minutes, what I want you to think about, there's 2 ways that we can approach this compare and contrast. And actually, if you bring the 2 together, then we will have a really terrific compare and contrast, but we only have 5 or 10 minutes left because we want to leave time for some of the questions that are out there. So if some of you would think about the questions on the left and some of you think about the questions on the right, we will take the photographs and what we see and create meaning. And that's really what this is all about, is how do we look at photographs and have them make meaning for us. And that meaning can be historical, it can be personal, it can be newsworthy. So let me get you to the next slide. You could compare just details. So the bottom is a screenshot that we looked at quickly with a detail from above. Both presidents are giving addresses. We can think about the organization and structure. Teresa tells us from her experience in 2009 there was a crush of people. It was amazing, and that is depicted in these images.
Maria points out that security seems much more important now.
It's true. It really does. Actually, you know, the Secret Service don't come into play as part of the security of the president until the 1880s. It takes a long time. The Secret Service was originally organized after the Civil War to fight counterfeiting. So if we look at the photographs, the photographers, we know the photographer on the right for sure was David Bergman. He created this image. It's actually 220 images, 220 photographs that are stitched together, creating a 1,474 megapixel image. In 1990, the average photograph had 10 megapixels, so this is a mammoth image, as you can probably guess. The photographer in is Gardner, originally Gardner, but there was a secondary photographer who rephotographed it. The dates, we have January 20th of 1990, and then we have March, so we have the discrepancy between March and January. When did that happen? Why did we move the date for the inauguration?
And those of you who were on our earlier sessions might actually know the answer to that one, so feel free to type that into chat.
I was hoping that I was pretty sure Harry would have talked about that. We also have the format. So as I mentioned, that actually the bottom image is 220 photographs, and the top image of Lincoln is one photograph. It was one glass plate. It was a wet glass plate. That means that Gardner had to prepare the emulsion, pour the emulsion onto the glass, expose it immediately. He had to do a lot of prep work just to get to making the image. Bergman was able to make lots and lots of images in a very short amount of time. We have the issue of color. The top image is actually not black and white. It's monochromatic, but there is no white. If you actually look at it, it's yellow, and maybe a dark black, a dark brown. But what does that lack of other colors tell us? What kind of information does it not convey? With color, sometimes we're able to see emotion. We're able to see that symbolism in a different way. With a monochromatic image, we project what we know to be color. For instance, we know that flag is black and white. We know it's red, white, and blue at the top. It's still cold here, Marie, in DC sometimes in March. That's why we still wear our coats.
I think while everybody's looking at these images, it might be a nice opportunity for us to jump over to a video question that we had submitted.
Oh, fantastic.
So I'm going to pull that up on the screen right now. I'll actually bring it to the top left-hand corner so I don't block anyone's view of those two photos.
My name is Sydney, and I'm a student at Lincoln Magnet School in Springfield, Illinois. My question is, explain how social media can encourage students to become active participants in historical events like the presidential inauguration.
Oh, that's a fantastic question. I think that there are probably a lot of different ways that can be done. There are lots of citizen journalist sites that are out there that gather up the ordinary citizen's point of view. You can write your own blog. You can share your images. You can bring them together to make your own books. There are some websites, photo sharing websites, that allow you to upload images and then make books for yourself. And in that kind of way, you can add your own text. You can write long text. You can write short text. It can simply be captions. So you're able to do what you wish with your own images.
Great. It looks like we'll be wrapping up within the next minute or so. But if there are any final questions, then please feel free to type them into the chat box. And Shannon, did you have anything else you wanted to touch on as we tie things up?
I hope that I hope that when you see photographs of the inauguration, that you will pay special attention to who the photographers are. And are they nationwide photographers? Are they specific photographers? Think about points of view. Is there a point of view, and where is it coming from? Is it the subject? Is the subject projecting a particular point of view? Is it the platform upon which the photograph exists? Is it being shared with you by somebody who has a particular point of view? And each of us actually experiences these images in different ways. There are some places where we experience them the same, but we all have a unique experience when we look at photographs. And by exploring what the variables are, we learn more about we have more information to respond to and to understand the reason that the photograph was made, where it was distributed, and why it was distributed.
Great, and let's try to squeeze one more question in here. One from Linda asking, do you think the technology has changed the photographer's intended audience?
That was a deep sigh, Linda. I think that does technology change the photographers? I think that yes, in that there are more people that one can reach. On the other hand, we don't always know where the photographs are going to go. If you were working for Life magazine in the 1950s, you knew that your image was going to be there in that publication. Subscribers and those sitting in the doctor's office were going to be able to see the image, but then that might be the end of it. Today, that's not always so. So in some ways, we don't know who our audiences are. What I think technology has changed is the access to images, so that these historic images that I have shown you, the only one that you probably don't have easy access to is this second inauguration of Lincoln. If you go to the Library of Congress, if you go to the Smithsonian website, if you go to National Archives, all of these images are available to you, and that hasn't always been the case. So when you find a topic that you're interested in, you become a part of the photographer's audience that he never knew he had. I actually worked with a photographer who told me that he doesn't care how people respond to his images. I don't think that's actually true, but his point is simply that once he's made the image and he's put it out there, he can't know who sees it and he can't know how they respond to it. So the best he can do is to make good decisions on the front end and hope that his ideas are clear enough.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Shannon. I could spend hours alone just on this last Gigapan image.
Yeah, it's
going
fantastic.
through.
Yeah.
So that's a great resource. We shared a lot of those links in the chat box for you, and we'll also have those listed on the website with our resources. I'd like to point out that if you did ask a question that we didn't have time to answer, don't worry, the discussion forums on the website will continue to exist, and check back in about a week's time. We'll see if we can address as many of those questions as possible. I do want to just say a big thank you again to Shannon for closing us off today, and to all of you for joining us throughout the day. A few final notes before we wrap it up fully. I'm also launching the evaluation link in the top left-hand corner of the screen again. And please, if you've been with us all day, take a quick moment to click on that yellow button, and that will launch the survey for you in your browser window. Also, we are going to have recordings of all of these sessions posted on the website, so if you missed anything or you'd like to review any material or share it with someone else, then please go back and check out the archive for the recordings of these sessions. We will be leaving you with a final Smithsonian Folkways song, and for those of you that have enjoyed those today, we'd like to point out that you can download them off the Smithsonian Folkways website, and we'll bring that information up on the screen for you momentarily. But thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Take care, and we hope to see you at the future Smithsonian Online Education Conferences.